Romans 2, verse 6. Who will render to every man according to his deeds. That simple verse ought to be a terrifying verse. Because he's just going to give you what your deeds deserve. That means every small, overlooked sin, every evil thought. Get Genesis 6, verse 5. Genesis 6, verse 5. Genesis chapter 6 and verse 5. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, notice this, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. That's not even talking about the things that you go do. It's just saying what happens in your thinking. Every imagination of the thoughts of the heart was only evil continually. And you say, well, that was before the flood. Look at me at Genesis 8, verse 21. Genesis chapter 8 and verse 21. This is after the flood. And the Lord smelled a sweet savor, and the Lord said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground any more for man's sake. Why? For the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. People think, well, I do some bad things, but I'm a good person. Genesis 8:21 says the exact opposite of that. Your heart is evil from, what does it say there? Youth. That verse explains why the teenage years are a problem. Right? One of the things that happens as you pass from being a child, where you're innocent, to a youth, is you come to the awareness of, wait a minute, I've got a problem. And you recognize that the thoughts, the imaginations of your heart are only evil continually, and people have struggles dealing with that. What is the solution to that? The solution to that is the cross of Christ, right? The solution to that is God's grace that saves you from what you deserve. But what happens in Romans 2 when man despises that? What if you reject the sacrifice of Christ and you say, well, I'll just deal with it. I'll handle it myself. I'll reform myself. You can't. Because every imagination of the thoughts of the heart is only evil continually. Go back with me to Romans chapter 2. Now, in Romans 2:6, when it says, who will render to every man according to his deeds, most of lost humanity has the concept of the scales of justice. And what I mean by that is you're all familiar with this, but it's the scales with two cups, one on each side, right? And your good works go on this side and your bad works go on this side, and you see which way it balances. And most folks think that what happens is, as long as my good outweighs the bad, then I'm okay. That's what people think. Read verse 7. Romans chapter 2 and verse 7. To them who by patient continuance in well-doing seek for glory and honor and immortality, eternal life. What Romans 2:7 is saying is God will give eternal life to folks according to their deeds, but what do they have to do according to that verse? It's the patient continuance in well-doing. So let me ask you this. How much of mankind engages in patient continuance in well-doing? Look with me at Romans chapter 3. Romans chapter 3, verse 12. Romans 3, verse 12. They are all gone out of the way. They are together become unprofitable. There is none that doeth good, no, not one. So let me go back to Romans 2:7 and ask the question again. How much of mankind engages in the patient continuance in well-doing? The answer to that is none. So Romans 2:7 is a logical possibility, but in reality an empty set. Do you see what I'm saying? Let me read it again. To them who by patient continuance in well-doing seek for glory and honor and immortality, eternal life. God will give eternal life to anyone that meets that condition. But how many men meet that condition? None. There is none that doeth good, no, not one. Romans 2, verse 8. Romans chapter 2 and verse 8. But, so this is a different circumstance, but unto them that are contentious and do not obey the truth, but obey unrighteousness, indignation and wrath. So if you meet the criteria of verse 7, God gives you eternal life. But if you meet the criteria of verse 8, then you get indignation and wrath. So let's look at the criteria for verse 8. It's those that do not obey the truth, but obey unrighteousness. So let me ask you this. How much of mankind obeys unrighteousness? Look with me at Romans 3, verse 10. Romans chapter 3 and verse 10. As it is written, there is none righteous, no, not one. Well, if there's none righteous, that means all must be unrighteous, doesn't it? So when Romans 2 verse 8 says, those that do not obey the truth but obey unrighteousness, all of mankind fits in verse 8. None of mankind fits in verse 7. So verse 8, what does all of mankind earn? All of mankind earns indignation and wrath, which is the opposite of eternal life.